Hello, everyone, my name is David, not Dave, or whatever Astaroth49 kept calling me the last time he made me do this. Unfortunately, Astaroth49, the Duke of Hell, is busy editing some of his other videos. So once again I'll be your narrator for his novel, Brutal-Fairytales, Stray Dogs, Redemption. Please remember to leave a like, share, and if you are new to the channel then please consider subscribing, as Astaroth49 puts out new content every single day. Without further ado, let us begin. They watched in complete bewilderment as Alastair walked off down the street. The two of them just looked at each other before following after Alastair as he brought them across the city right to a used goods pawn shop. The store had a big red banner across the display window with up to 50% off blowout sale, written on it with bold lettering. Astaroth had remembered reading something about this in the newspaper from earlier this morning. Now he was wondering what they were doing here. He was starting to wonder why Alastair had to lead them here. Did he need to buy something before going on the mission at hand? Alastair walked towards the store's front door and pushed the buzzer on the side of the door. He had to wait for the magnetic locks to disengage so they could go inside. Astaroth quickly examined all the items behind the heavy iron-caged window. As they heard the bells on the door ring out, he turned his head to the sounds. Astaroth looked over to Rook and shrugged his shoulders before following Alastair inside the store. Inside, Astaroth saw Alastair walking to the gun display case. Astaroth walked up next to him as a cashier walked over towards them behind the sealed-off display cases. At least this made some degree of sense to them. For trying to take on dread rats with your bare hands would be a suicide mission. They are vicious, clever, and they always attack in packs. Above all, they might even be carrying the plague on them. So, it was best to deal with them at a safe distance. Although they were large, any small arms or small rifles could deal with them quite easily. It did not take much to bring them down. However, they were still a threat not to be taken lightly. Astaroth already had his personal peacekeeper in his jacket right now. He wondered if this was Alastair's first gun he had ever purchased. Just so long as he did not get anything too ridiculous or something low caliber. Then dealing with the dread rats should not be too much of an issue for them. However, Astaroth and Rook still did not know the first thing about Alastair. For all they knew, he could have been a bloody coward who would run away at the first sign of trouble, only to leave Astaroth and Rook to pick up the slack. At the very least, Alastair could be a particularly good meat shield, or a good distraction for them. As the rats were eating him, Astaroth could deal with them quite quickly and easily. Both Alastair and Astaroth were 10 years old. So, in the eyes of the Church and God, they could be seen as quarter-time workers or helpers. They could work quarter-time at a job doing light work for up to, but no more than 6 hours a day for 4 days and 4 days only. Or they could do E to D work for the Huntsman's Guild with E ranking as the safest. Alastair must have found this job for them from the Huntsman's calling board. Ever since the hero and dragon started destroying Zion, the huntsmen and huntresses stepped up to protect the remnants of society from the beasts and other threats of Zion. Threats that were too big for the city watch to deal with, but too small or too expensive for the government to be able to get involved with. They have only gotten better over time with new weapons to bring down beasts. The same beasts that were once thought to be too powerful or dangerous for any one person to deal with. New communication systems making it much easier to contact and dispatch a huntsman or huntress. They were steadily improving each and every year, slowly but steadily becoming more efficient at what they do. As the Huntsman's Guild rose to power by protecting small towns and small rising settlements, each of the huntsmen and huntresses were paid with both money and world-renowned fame in some cases. Their legends were written about for years long after they had passed. They are right up there in fame and popularity with some of Zion's famous celebrities. Astaroth personally could not care less about fame. He only cared about the money that they were getting paid for doing a job like this one. It was not much, but at least it would be something for his time and effort. Since Rook and he would be sticking their necks out for this job after all. Astaroth noticed that the young adult cashier walked with a bad limp in his stride. Under his right arm was an old metal medical crutch with an old washcloth duct taped onto it for more cushioning. Astaroth looked up, examining the cashier as he limped his way towards them. He was dark-skinned, with dark eyes, and short black hair. An old worn red flannel button-up shirt, worn gray jeans, and worn-out shoes. Astaroth would guess, since he could not see his shoes. The one thing he could see was the man's dog tags over his shirt. He must be back from the war up north if Astaroth were to guess. There was a strange sound coming from him as he walked. It sounded like a rusty spring or piston. He must have an old, rusted prosthetic limb on him to replace his missing leg. This was not too unfamiliar to Astaroth personally. After all, not everyone is so lucky to return home from war entirely intact. Sure, there are some cases of the body returning home, but the mind is fractured and broken. There are also cases of the body being fractured but the mind is still completely intact. For war was a strange thing that man should not do unless absolutely necessary. It tests, changes, and breaks people in their own unique way. It is cold, ruthless, and unforgiving. War takes the best and leaves only the worst behind. If nothing else, at least this poor soul managed to find his way back home. At the very least he was still alive. As there were several more that were not as fortunate as he was. For he had returned home alive, whereas most others never returned home at all. Or if they did, they more often than not returned home in a wooden box or a clay urn. That was simply just the way it is. Unfortunately, after the Third Era, the Church passed a law that made it mandatory for everyone to enlist in the military after their 18th birthday. After all the destruction and wars, the Church had to make this law. Shortly after, either the hero of destruction or the dragon goddess of destruction went on their rampages. The Church could quickly rebuild itself and its infrastructure from the ground up. Every citizen was expected to defend themselves without relying on the city watch. So, in the Holy Lands, gun control was very lenient. At the age of 10, anyone could go to the state offices to apply for an E-rank weapon and carry permit. All through Zion, weapons were placed into a lettering system from E to S, with the S rank being the highest. These rights to arm oneself will be stripped away if a person committed a felony crime. Astaroth loved his gun too much to lose it from doing something so foolish. There were two places in all of creation that he tried to avoid at all costs. Those being jail and hell. Those were the only two places he could live without seeing. So, even he knew the laws that must be followed for society to survive and remain civil. "Can I help the two of you?" the cashier asked as he leaned down onto the counter, taking as much weight off his bad leg. "I want that scope .357 lever-action rifle and a suppressor for it. And the .357 revolver, a box of 100 rounds please sir," Alastair answered quickly as he handed the cashier his identification card. It seemed like he had been waiting a long time to get his hands on these, as he was beaming with excitement over them. Astaroth looked over the guns that Alastair wanted as the color washed from his face. He could not believe what he was seeing. Nevertheless, they were here all the same, but they were different from the ones he had. The lever-action rifle had a short barrel, a golden receiver, and a golden lever. The wood was polished white oak with a black rubber mat on the end of the stock. It had deer's hide wrapped around its stock and handle. The hide would help improve the grip as well as making it easier to rest one's cheek on while aiming it. It was the preferred rifle of the cavalry back in the day. It was a small lightweight rifle perfect for cavalry battles. Although it was a bit tricky to reload while on horseback. The rifle itself was designed specifically to be as lightweight and easy to fire as possible, even while firing the rifle with one hand. Although not remarkably effective over longer distances, it was still an extremely dangerous rifle and was still highly effective for what it is. For above all, it was made to be cheap. It was made to be efficient. It was made to be disposable and was made to be produced rapidly. Astaroth noticed all the tally marks scratched onto the barrel. He knew what each one meant. It was a beautiful looking gun for an incredibly old school military surplus rifle. He knew it was a surplus rifle by the Holy Army signet stamped on the back of the receiver. He knew that this rifle was close to 60 years old. Astaroth knew that someone loved this rifle and it had saved the owner's life more than once. He could testify firsthand at not just the gun's reliability but its proficiency as well. It had been 2 years since he had seen a rifle like this. It was so similar, yet it was different from the one he once had. The revolver was a military surplus weapon as well. They were meant to be together as a set. The revolver was an old, top-break model with a golden 6-shot chamber. The barrel of the revolver was 18 inches long, making it easier for longer ranges and to keep the revolver stable while firing. However, the cavalrymen were not exactly getting into long-distance shootouts. The handle was the same as its rifle, polished white oak with the Holy Army signet stamped into the right side of the handle. It was the preferred sidearm for the cavalry back in the day. Thanks to its top-break action, it was easier to reload one-handed even on horseback. Even though the revolver was made to be as easy as possible to reload one-handed while on horseback, it was not unheard of for several cavalrymen to have more than one revolver on their person. Simply because trying to reload in a firefight was not exactly an ideal situation to be in. So, to compensate, cavalrymen would carry additional revolvers. Like the rifles, these were made to be cheap and mass-produced. Still, for what it was a very efficient firearm even by today's standards. It was reliable and it was durable. It was easy to maintain and clean. Above all, it was highly efficient for what it was made for. It was old, but it was still a remarkably effective sidearm to have even today. As for the munitions themselves, it was simply cheaper and easier for the church to produce firearms that use the same calibration. This meant that they only had to ship out one specific type of ammo to their soldiers. This also meant that should a soldier run out of munition for their rifle, they could take the ammo from their revolver and continue fighting. There was a reason why these were the military standard issue for so many years. These particular guns would only fairly recently fall out of favor to the church. Largely in part thanks to the invention of semi-automatic to fully automatic firearms. As war itself changed, the church had to adapt or be left behind and overtaken. Sadly, that meant leaving these guns behind and adopting newer, more modern firearms for warfare. However, these guns were still sought after by hunters and advent gun collectors. These guns were not particularly hard to find across the Holy Land. Because of the sheer number of them that were mass-produced during the previous wars. There were thousands of them out there, maybe even hundreds of thousands. They were not particularly hard to get replacement parts for or to get repaired. That is why most hunters prefer them, because of how cheap they are, how reliable they are, and how easy it is to maintain them for long-term usage. Now, these instruments of war would serve Alastair as well as they served the previous owners. Astaroth looked away from those guns as horrible memories shot through his twisted mind. He knew these firearms all too well. his skin became cold as it throbbed in phantom pains from the past. It was hard for him to forget no matter how hard he tried. Nevertheless, he knew that he could not escape this twisted feeling. He just had to take his mind off it as quickly as possible, or risk losing what little was left of his sanity and his humanity. Astaroth patted his brother's side to remind himself that he was not in that hellish place again. It was warm and sunny now. It was not cold, dark, and covered in ice, snow, and mist. He was not back in that frigid hellscape again. He took a deep breath before he looked around at everything around him. It was more like he was seeing that he was still here and not in that nightmare once more. He quickly put those horrible memories out of his mind. He was not willing to remember them right now. Above all, he knew that those guns were not toys. These were extremely dangerous weapons and not to be taken lightly. They were something to be held in respect. They were something that would help keep the user alive as long as possible. It was almost humorous to him that he himself was not the one wielding them, but those same model firearms would save him once again. It seemed like the universe was playing a cruel trick on him. Nevertheless, he still found it strangely humorous as he let out a guttural chuckle. "I've had my eye on these beauties for weeks now," Alastair explained to Astaroth. Astaroth, however, could not care about Alastair and his unbridled childish excitement right now. He just could not care about that right now. After all, they had a job they had to do, and the sooner they were done with it the better. You take loving care of them, and they'll take better care of you. They won't fail you when it counts, Astaroth said coldly as he looked down at those guns that made him remember. They made him remember that horrible nightmare once more. However, now was not the appropriate time to deal with these feelings, if they were feelings at all. "You, okay?" Alastair asked, confused by how Astaroth looked at the guns. "Fuck off," Astaroth stated quickly as he looked away from Alastair and those guns. The cashier looked over the identification card before handing Alastair the paperwork he had to fill out. Alastair quickly filled out all the information required for the paperwork. The cashier handed the paperwork to another associate who took it to the back. After a few minutes, the other gentleman reached around from the back and just simply gave a thumbs up to the cashier. Everything was good now. Alastair could finally get rung up and leave here with these firearms. He had waited for this day for so long now. He could barely contain his excitement as the cashier simply nodded at him before handing him back his identification card. The cashier turned around and with one hand took the rifle off the rack and set it on the glass display case for Alastair. After that, he took the revolver out from the display case and set it next to the rifle with its holster next to it. Then he handed him a box of munitions for the firearms. This must just have been another day for this cashier. At least someone has finally come in to take these firearms off the store's hands. Although he would not have imagined it would be someone so young to finally take these guns. Nevertheless, all sales were final, and he was paid either way. These firearms are simply no longer his concern. "That'll be $160. The cashier said as the cash register told up. Alastair quickly handed the cashier a stack of folded and worn bills. Astaroth noticed the money was old. Alastair must have been saving up for a long time to buy these firearms. Astaroth can genuinely care any less about Alastair's purchase. After all, he had his own peacekeeper in his jacket right now. At least this would help with the job at hand. Still, he could have gone the rest of his life without ever seeing these firearms ever again. He would have been simply fine with that if that were the case. However, those damned memories just would not stop coming back to him right now. He was starting to wonder if his newfound associate knew who he really was. Was Alastair planning to use that against him somehow for money? Did he truly know who he was, or was he just a simple-minded fool who needed help with some really large rats? Either way, he would have to keep a close eye on Alastair just to be safe. After all, trust is earned, never given, and Astaroth himself barely trusted anyone. The very least of all, some random idiot who just ran into him. For now, Astaroth and Rook would play along after all. All they had to do was simply eliminate some overgrown rodents. If Alastair tries anything funny, then Astaroth would just put a bullet in his skull and be done with this. As Astaroth looked around the store, he noticed a rifle on sale behind the display case. His eyes quickly locked onto it as it intrigued him. As the cashier was finishing cashing out Alastair, he noticed Astaroth looking at the rifle. Once he was done ringing up Alastair, he quickly turned his attention to Astaroth. The cashier looked at the rifle Astaroth was looking at. A top rail system mounted the scope in place. The metal of the gun was blackened. A magazine just below the bolt and receiver. The blackened barrel itself was long but completely suppressed. Astaroth was not a fool. He knew that just because it had a suppressed barrel did not make the gun silent like in the movies or radio plays. It would only lower the decibels to a certain degree. That just meant that he would not need hearing protection while firing this rifle. The wood was polished purple hardwood with leather wrapped around the front grip and stock, as well as a rubber mat at the end of the stock. It was quite beautiful to him. The cashier reached over and handed it to Astaroth. Astaroth had heard about this particular rifle from a gun informant magazine. It was a Rat King Slayer rifle made specifically to deal with large dread rats. It was not particularly effective for large game animals. However, they were not exactly hunting large game animals right now. He was starting to wonder if he should go ahead and just pick this up while he was already here. They were about to deal with some large rats after all. It would be very handy in the upcoming mission. This particular rifle was literally designed and built for killing dread rats. It was highly accurate and deadly at 200 and 250 yards. Anything after that, then it would not be as effective. However, it was still a pretty sturdy rifle meant to last quite a long while. Astaroth had been wanting to try one out for quite some time. Maybe this was the universe's way of compensating him for his troubles. Still, he was not exactly sure what caliber this particular one was in. For these particular rifles came in several different calibrations. However, judging from how big the magazine was, he could take .22 long Magnum long rifle off the equation. It looked like the magazine was meant for a larger round. Either 5.45 nat rounds, 5.56 nat rounds, or 7.62 RVP rounds. Either way, the rounds would definitely drop a dread rat. What caliber is it? Astaroth asked, looking over the rifle. 5.56, but it can still use the .223 rounds. It's the best hunting or survivalist rifle, with 12-round magazines. Better get it now before the church and the mages blast us all back to the Stone Age again. That or the hero, and the dragons show up. Or the other monsters wake up and still send us back to the Stone Age. The cashier explained to Astaroth. The cashier was not trying to push the rifle onto him. There was simply no need for him to do that. He could already see that Astaroth's mind was made up. He really wanted the rifle. How much? Astaroth asked, handing the cashier his identification card. First things first. The cashier responded while taking his identification card. Like with Alastair, the cashier handed him the paperwork he would need to fill out. Astaroth quickly filled out all the required information they needed from him. As before, the cashier handed off the paperwork to his associate. The associate took the paperwork into the back room and checked out all the information. He simply gave the cashier another thumbs up, letting him know that everything was ready to go. Since neither Astaroth nor Alastair had a criminal record, it was quite easy to do a full background search on them. After all, they really have not done anything or have had the time to do anything. It was quite easy for the store to do a background search on them, since there was nothing for them to really find about the two of them. $145 with the ammo and 3 clips. The cashier answered, handing over the card back to Astaroth. Astaroth could not wait to finally own one of these rifles. To have a weapon literally designed to kill the foes that he was about to go up against. It would surely only make the job a lot easier for them. That, and it was not like he did not have the money for it or anything better to do today really. If nothing else, he got a surprisingly good rifle out of this ordeal. However, this would leave him next to completely broke. Astaroth reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He quickly counted out the money and then slammed the money on the glass. He had to do this quickly before he came back to his senses and realized he did not have much money left. He would deal with the buyer's remorse later. Not only did he really want this particular rifle, but he knew that he would need it for the coming up job ahead. Alastair noticed all the money that Astaroth had left in his wallet. It was not much of anything really. Alastair knew that Astaroth needed this job as much as he did. Astaroth was next to broke, and getting this rifle was going to set him back for months. The cashier smiled as he rang him up and took the money. Astaroth and Alastair loaded their guns before shouldering them. "What are you boys about to do?" the cashier asked, watching them closely. Astaroth noticed the cashier's free hand resting under the counter. In his mind, he knew that the cashier's hand was on a gun. "Killing some dread rats, that's all," Alastair answered quickly and excitedly. Astaroth just stared at Alastair, wondering why he was about to do this again. Then he remembered that he was short on money. He needed to do this to feed his dogs after all. He just needed to get through this as fast as he could. "Okay, then big game hunters, happy hunting, and don't get bit and infected," the cashier stated as he leaned over on the display case. Astaroth said coldly. "Yes, Ash," Alastair quickly replied as he looked at Astaroth. "If we get sick once we get out of the hospital. After all the several hours of very painful shots that we will undoubtedly have to endure." "Where exactly would you like my foot, between your kidneys or lungs?" Astaroth explained to him, knowing full well what would happen to them if they got infected. "Neither," Alastair said in shock. "Okay, then I will stick my fist so fucking far up your ass that I'll be able to help you floss," Astaroth explained, glaring at Alastair. "Oh. Okay then," Alastair said in fear that Astaroth would be true to his word. "I don't think he's joking," the cashier stated calmly. "And nobody asked you?" Alastair snapped in a panic. "Eyes to the skies, ears to the ground, boys," the cashier stated. "We'll fight on through the firestorm together," Alastair stated back to the man. The cashier saluted them with a smile and a laugh as they went to leave. "Speak for yourself," Astaroth stated coldly. "Eyes to the skies, ears to the ground. Our flag flies high, and we will never let our sights down. We stand together with our brothers and our sisters. We'll fight on through the firestorm together and we will not fail." It was the slogan of the military to remind them to stay alert and be vigilant. Above all, to fight on for the glory and the honor of their country. For even the children are taught at such an early age that there is no greater glory to be achieved in life than dying in service to one's country. there was a reason why all the other countries of the world thought that the Holy Lands were full of crazy death-worshipping zealots. The best and only way to surely describe them was fearless above all. They truly just did not care about the cost, they would win no matter what. For they simply had no other options available. That reckless abandonment, that sheer determination, and that sheer force of will was the reason why every other country thought they were insane. For it did not matter the cost, no matter how many men and women lost their lives. More would still come no matter what. For the church and their armies had infinite morale, they would keep pushing for victory no matter what. For at an early age every child is raised to believe that everyone simply has an appointed time in which they will be called home to their mother and father above, to be counted amongst their chosen, their most courageous, and their most fearless for defending their promised kingdom on Zion. As well as being raised to believe that there is no greater glory that one can achieve in life than dying in service to one's country. Effectively speaking, everyone born in the Holy Lands is brainwashed from an incredibly early age to fear no death and to fight on to the bitter end or die without honor. At least Astaroth could see the ugly truth about the matter for what it is. He himself was strangely okay with it. There was simply no other cheaper alternative. After all, people would always be quicker and cheaper to replace than equipment was. Humans were one of the only self-renewing resources of Zion. For what is life, and for that matter what is death, without something to believe in, something to hold true above all? For mankind itself would simply go mad or be lost in the infinite possibility of despair without something to believe in. As they walked away from the counter towards the door, Alastair stopped at the comic rack. Alastair saw a new comic called The Adventures of the Pint-Sized Slasher. Astaroth quickly pulled the comic out of Alastair's hands and put it back onto the rack. "Hey, I like these," Alastair stated, watching Astaroth as he forced the comic back into the rack. "I don't give a fuck, we're on the clock, so move it," Astaroth ordered, pointing towards the door. "Yeah, I guess you're right," Alastair said as he walked out of the store with Astaroth and Rook in tow. He could come back and buy it later. For right now all three of them had a job to do, and time was money. He hoped it would still be here when he came back. Those comic books were not exactly a hot commodity or a bestseller. However, they still sold relatively well, everything considering. Alastair found them to be quite enjoyable, if not a bit dark and brooding. To anyone who has made it to the end, thank you. Please remember to leave a like, share and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next episode.